Okay, the second half of this lecture, Peculiarities of Urbanity, have to do with the kind of cascade effect of complexities that human beings invent or instigate, or you can think about them as responses that emerge. It may not be that people plan it out. It may be that these are a kind of emergent phenomenon. Human beings' complex responses to the catastrophe of living and farming in an area where boom and bust are regular occurrences, where there's resource uncertainty, okay? And I want you to recognize that human beings' responses to catastrophe have a cascade effect. That cascade effect is what I mean when I say that complexity is viral, that it spreads, that complexity replicates itself in a fractal, like fractals do. There are a whole bunch of greater degrees of complexity that emerge when human beings begin to solve a particular problem. And so you solve one problem and it causes its own problems. Then you solve those problems and it causes more problems. And you get increasing degrees of complexity until you've got big urban states, okay? So let's look at a cascade of complex responses to catastrophe, right? If you are farming in a place where massive rivers wipe out your farming village, where uncertain weather patterns make it rain on time, sometimes rain in time for you to plant your crops and avoid starving to death, or don't rain on time, or the monsoon doesn't come at all, and then you have drought and you starve to death. You've got to find a way to build infrastructure to control water. And an awful lot of urban societies appear because of the need to terraform, right? You have to have massive land work projects to either keep the river in its bed, to move the water to where you can use it during a drought condition. All of those kind of infrastructure issues, irrigation, terracing, building dikes and levees, all those kind of things that you played with in Bosses and Bost, those radically change labor issues inside of a farming village, okay? You're going to have the emergence of something that you don't have with gathering and hunting. You're going to have the emergence of occupational specialization, where there are some people who do certain kinds of labor and other people who do other kinds of labor, okay? And, the easiest and perhaps the earliest occupational specialization falls along gendered lines, okay? And this is partly because, for the first time, the male physiology is better adapted to acts of raw power, raw strength, as compared to acts of stamina or something like that. Gathering and hunting doesn't require you to be physically buff, all right? Terraforming does. If you're going to be moving earth, making bricks, building walls, building dikes, building dams, digging, and all this kind of stuff, men have a caloric competitive advantage. They get more work done per unit of calories than women do, okay? If it's a strength activity. Well, if the men are spending time engaging in terraforming and building infrastructure because that's physically more effective for them to do it, that means that women end up picking up other types of labor, okay? So men in these early urban agricultural communities that are going to develop into cities, they're engaged in farming, but in addition to farming, they're terraforming, they're building infrastructure, okay? And women, they're engaged in farming. Don't think that farming is something that has sexually differentiated, at least not in this early time period, okay? What they're gonna do is process the surplus that farming enables, okay? So if you have a successful crop one year, that means you've got to thresh huge amounts of grain. You're gonna have to winnow huge amounts of grain. You're gonna have to, weave baskets to store tons of grain. You're going to have to spend time preparing it and baking it. Or for that matter, even more interesting, raw materials processing is that you have to spend time brewing it. This is one of those funny things. In early civilizations, they're not big into bread making with their grain. Grain goes bad quickly. And so what they do with it is make it into something that won't spoil as quickly. And beer is the thing that they make grain into. And they make beer and drink it as if it's a meal, right? I know people who do that nowadays. But this is one of the things that women are doing, is turning grain, processing it, turning grain into something that is that doesn't spoil. The other thing that women are doing, let's say that the thing that men and women are farming is flax, right? Or cotton. Or, you know, if they're engaged in some shepherding, some pastoralism, wool, okay? Well, if you collect tons of it, then you have to have people sit still to spin it into thread, weave it into clothing, weave it into cloth, turn the cloth into clothing. So there's this processing activity that women do when men are using their raw physical strength to engage in terraforming, all right? So you're gonna get a gender-based bifurcation of labor. You're also going to get the emergence of other kinds of occupational specializations. Of all of the ones that are worth mentioning, professionalized religion is one of them, okay, where you're going to get a priestly, a group of dedicated priests or priestesses or shamans or something like that, who are responsible for the religious life of the community. Who claim to have some sort of specialized knowledge or specialized technique of interceding with the divine in order to, increase rainfall or manage the ecological needs of the people. Often, professionalized religion is tied to text-based writing systems, so you're going to get people who become specialists in the written language. Right, because that's a complex and technical matter. Often the people who are the scribes are part of the professional religious class. So those are things that are peculiar to urban people that you don't see in gathering and hunting. All right. And because you have occupational specialization where different people are doing different kinds of labor, you shouldn't be surprised to see that labor is understood as differently valued across the society. Okay, and there are some kinds of labor that are compensated better than other kinds of labor. So if you are a priest or a priestess, that is going to, require a much richer kind of lifestyle. Whereas if you are just a street sweeper, then people might, only pay you a little tiny bit for that kind of labor. And that's how you have the emergence of class, that is rich versus poor, or a great gradation of poor to rich. This is something that you don't see in gathering and hunting societies. Class does not exist. Everybody is more or less the same class in gathering and hunting societies, all right? Here's the other thing. If the men in a family or men in a clan spend a huge amount of caloric energy building dikes and irrigation networks and slash and burn to prepare land for agriculture, if you pour calories into permanent infrastructure, you don't want that to belong to just everybody, right? You don't want that labor to be lost and just to melt back into community property. What you want is the effort you put into improving a piece of land to remain in your family or to remain in your clan. You want your kinship network to benefit from the massive labor inputs that people put into them to make them capable of producing food. So you're going to get the idea of land ownership. That's something that gatherers and hunters don't have. Land ownership, you're going to have patterns of heritability. That is, there are the emergence of rules over who in the family will inherit a piece of land after it's been improved by a preceding generation. That's something totally new. This is something that happens after the Neolithic Revolution. Is how do you determine who owns surplus? Well, patterns of heritability, senses of ownership, and that ownership should be passed on across generations. And insofar as you've got rich and poor, landowners who are able to pass on their land to other people. That means that the potential for wealth is cross-generational. You shouldn't be surprised to begin to see the emergence of vertically oriented sociopolitical hierarchies, right? This is something you don't have. You've got egalitarianism in gathering and hunting societies, vertical oriented sociopolitical hierarchies. Keep in mind that not all vertically oriented sociopolitical hierarchies are perfectly pyramidal. You can have kingship where you do have a perfect pyramid. You can have democracy where power is shared among a demos of small-scale landowners. You can have diarchy where you've got two kings. That's like Sparta. You can have different kinds of oligarchies. The whole point is that you're going to have some people with power and other people with no power. Okay, and that's something that you don't see in gathering and hunting societies. And the larger your farming village, right? Small farming villages don't have very much need for this. But if you're in a place where you have a small farming villages in a place that's catastrophic, then you're going to have the emergence of these kinds of increasingly vertical political structures. Lastly, you got to have some, I can't remember if this is last, but you have to have some means of claiming that your authority is legitimate, okay? And I mean philosophically legitimate or religiously legitimate or structurally legitimate, because, you know, people sometimes resent how come you get to be the boss, all right? And there are a number of ways to create this legitimacy. There are secular means of creating legitimacy. For example, raw military power, that is, I can beat you into submission so that you don't, you give in to my authority, all the way to sacred legitimacy, where I can make some sort of claim of religious right to rule. And then you can see any mixture of those things in a continuum. Any particular city, state, or urban culture might have a mixture of secular and sacred legitimacy, especially if you've got more than one political pole. For example, in our version of Bosses and Bost, there's a religious, you know, village shrine kind of authority. And there's another kind of authority that operates that's somewhat militaristic and somewhat based on positive, generalized reciprocity, so that they've been helpful and given people all kinds of benefits. So legitimacy, anywhere from the range of sacred to secular. Oh, and where's the last title? Yeah, I think that's the last slide. Yeah. Okay, so that's the last slide. So that's what I wanted you to know to prepare for the game Urbanity, because we're going to be dealing with those issues in Urbanity, and we'll see how those issues in Urbanity relate to Empire when we get to that game. And then for the rest of the week, or the next couple of weeks, we'll be going through examples of these issues in the historical, in the historical record, so you can see how this works in particular, and then you can maybe plan how you want to use those issues in gameplay or in Empire, the next game. Okay, so that's all we're doing today. Thanks.